Live now.
Great. Hi, I'm David Benson. I'm the Director of Branding here at Google. I am hosting this live Hangout on air. So I want to welcome you all to the Partner Academy C-Suite program. Hopefully you can all see me loud and clear. And you have also got the G+ page to which you can post your questions. If anyone does post to that, please just be aware that there may be a short lag between you posting the question and me being able to read it. So just please be aware of that. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, I urge you to ping them and put them up on the page as soon as possible, and that will enable me to answer those for you. And so let's kick off. I hope you've enjoyed the two sessions. The sessions to date have obviously been the Moments That Matter one, which I did myself, and equally you did a couple of sessions with Johan Eriksson all about following consumers and understanding how to match the message with the consumer's needs so much better. The next module will be released this Friday, and it will be about measuring and valuing the online consumer. But that will also reflect some of the questions, in fact, that I have been sent so far. So why don't we start off without any further ado, and let's start to answer those questions. Right. So the first question I've been sent is really regarding TV effectiveness. So I'll read you the question in its entirety, and then I'll respond. Despite descending audience ratings, TV campaigns still are shown to be very effective, or show very effective return on media investment and high impact on important brand metrics in tracking. That said, how can we argue to move money away from this medium? So, fairly top line, fairly broad question. I think the first point I think there are a number of important pieces within that question. One is the tracking, and one is the argument for moving money. So let's address those in order. I think the first point is, depending on what you have to remember that the tracking that many brands use has been developed over a period of time and has been built to be TV tracking. It will often use a certain form of asking questions, which clients like to keep consistent because they want their results to be consistent over time, which is entirely sensible. But the way in which the questions are asked and the people they're asked to are normally done in different ways. So an example I'll use from my life, I used to work on Ford, and we used to have opinion and preference brand tracking as well as awareness and ad recall. And what we were hoping to have was to have the questions asked among people who were in market for cars. However, it was very difficult to be able to get those people who are in market for cars offline. And in fact, we were looking at either people who had bought a car in the last 6 months or people who were thinking of buying a car. When I dug deeper into this, what actually was happening is the surveyors would literally be going to the town wherever they were going to survey, and they would literally walk down the road, walk down past the houses until they saw a new car on the drive, and then they would go and knock on their door. And what that actually resulted in was, in fact, probably 80% of our questionnaire group, our respondent group, had actually purchased recently rather than were about to purchase. Now, that's not to say that this kind of research is wrong, but it's just one little example of how the methodology reflects what you're trying to do, but also the real parameters and restraints which offline or real life questionnaires and tracking people have. Equally, you may be using computer-aided telephone surveys or a number of different things, but what you find time and again is that every methodology has its own idiosyncrasies. And if you're using a system, TV's been around for nearly 100 years, if you're using a system which has been built alongside that, you're going to be able to replicate the consistency, but not necessarily generate the specificity or accuracy that you would need to be able to say, actually, who am I targeting and am I getting value among them? So we can come to that later. The important thing is to say, how are we going to make the money? How are we going to argue to move money away from this media? Well, I think the key thing is, if 90 or 100% of your money is already going in TV, then yes, there is a case to make to move money away from TV media. But I think what's also important is it's not necessarily moving TV budget into video, although that makes a lot of sense. But actually what you should be looking is at the least effective things on the schedule. So if TV is very effective, what about print? What about outdoor? What about all the other things on the schedule? Obviously, you would then look at that in terms of the specific targets you need to reach. And what we see increasingly is when you're really looking at younger targets, you are no longer reaching those people with TV. So again, when you're looking at broad surveys or broad measures of brand metrics, then yeah, particularly if you're looking at older people, then TV will show as very effective. If you look at those measures of brand metrics within specific target groups, once you start to dip below 35 or even 40, you start to see some very interesting trends breaking out. A very interesting thing I was just watching before this the Hangout started. I was watching a really interesting video by Game Theory, which is a YouTube channel on YouTube. They asked their viewers, they have 5 million subscribers, so they're a huge channel. They asked their viewers a questionnaire. 85% of them said they never watch television. 85% of Game Theory subscribers never watch television. So I think the argument is, if at very least, you should be using online video to drive incremental reach with your TV campaigns, so they should be apportioned within both of those, and look at ways of doing budget splits. There's a lot of media planning behind that in terms of frequency balancing, etc. The number which we work out on average in the UK makes sense, is about 24% of the budget. But depending on your local market and your target group, etc., you'll want to go and take a look at that. So in the UK, that was for the target group, 16 to 34s. So I would suggest minimum you want to be looking at using online video to drive the full coverage, so incremental reach with your TV campaign. And then on top of that, if you are looking at younger audiences, you really should be looking at a video-first strategy. The most important thing, however, is to have a video-neutral approach, which is something which is surprising we see a lot of brands are not doing at the moment, where the online video budget is still seen as part of a digital budget, and the TV budget is seen as an offline budget. That just does not make any sense at all. So moving to video-neutral planning and bringing the video online and the traditional video budgets together and then optimizing across one budget has to be the first move. I hope that answered that question. Please ping more and ping to the G+ group if you want any more detail on that. Moving on. This was another question, but very closely related. We use online video on a regular basis, but we have problems separating out our results in brand tracking based on these monthly, weekly figures. Why isn't my online video working? And really, that will come down to three things. The accuracy of your tracking. What is your tracking set up to track? Do you have large enough representative surveys? You will always get a certain amount of misattribution to TV. So even though people may have seen a video on online or on YouTube, they will say, oh yeah, I saw a TV ad, because they experience it in the same way. So a TV ad is a really convenient label. I saw an ad. It's very easy for them to say, all right, I saw that on TV, I can't quite remember. So there is definitely a misattribution fact. And then the third point really comes down to how you're applying your budgets and setting up your campaign. If your budget is really only showing, say, 8 or 10% of your budget is on YouTube, 90% of your budget is on television, then it's going to be very difficult to actually pick up any difference in that tracking. We had one client who said, the test wasn't particularly successful. when I dug into the detail, they had spent $40 million on television and 75,000 on YouTube, and were surprised they could not tease the two apart. So the important thing here is making sure that you understand what you're testing and saying, have I set up a fair test? And what we find 9 times out of 10 is people are hoping to learn something without putting the groundwork in the first place to say, actually, what is it I'm trying to track? Have I got a sensible way of doing this? Moving away from that, a couple more questions. This really focuses on the second presentation that Johan did, where he talked about the 12 external tools. So the 12 external tools he referred to, everyone was there's some questions saying, you know, do I have to sign up for DoubleClick or the full stack in order to get those, or in fact, can I get those for free? I think the most important thing here to say is that you know, obviously we believe the full DBM stack is a fantastic way to go forward, but we have a huge long tail business, and a large number of those people buy through AdWords. So as far as possible, we try and service everybody equally. Obviously, there are specificities and technicalities of what you can and cannot do via any system. And so there are always tools which are available whether or not you're signed up to DBM or whether you're working through AdWords for video. The important thing is to decide what your needs are, what does good look like for you, what is the hypothesis you're testing or the problem you're trying to solve, and then choosing which tools to use and make them work for you. One of the things we always say here at Google, we're all very smart people, and as are people in all our agencies and partner agencies, it's very easy to knock holes in things or to say this doesn't come with an instruction book. But actually, the really smart people are able to say, these are just tools. My problems and my clients' challenges are mine to solve. How can these tools help me do that? And I think that's a really good way to think of approaching all of these tools. So those were some sort of broad questions which I would say were module agnostic. So I've answered those. What I'd like to do now is just do a brief recap of the key modules, just so to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first module I did, which was titled Winning in the Moments That Matter, the key points here was that, you know, when we look at the digital landscape and the opportunities that are out there today, we find that we're actually very well equipped as brand marketers and agency planners and buyers to deal with this new modern future. And it's very easy to be overwhelmed by technology. But actually, approaching from a position of fear and approaching from a position of negativity is not going to lead to a good outcome. And it's really important that we recognize the strengths that we have to take forward. And that is really about understanding the consumer, the brands and the stories, and over time having the skills to moving forward, we talked a bit about how the opportunity has changed for marketers and what's driving that opportunity. And that key thing is, of course, the rise of the mobile handset and the fact now that people engage with their mobile phones more than their partners delivers us a huge host of signals, which at Google, using the fantastic technology we have and the super smart engineers and a wide variety of signals from a wide variety of different sources, we are then able to start to solve those marketing challenges in the same way as we solve challenges for consumers. The key challenges which we focused on were really, how do you actually find more better qualified customers? So huge businesses need to find huge numbers of customers, but you don't want to talk to people who could never buy your product. You wouldn't, if you're L'Oreal, you sell shampoo, you don't want to talk to me. I don't use the stuff. However, it's important that you talk to everyone who could potentially be your customer in your category, echoing the Byron Sharp, which really forms the core of our thinking. So we talked about different ways of finding better qualified customers, using data, using remarketing, using the different tools available to us, and those are changing and growing all of the time. But the important thing there being finding those at scale. So at huge scale, obviously across the Google properties, whether it's YouTube, which is the largest video platform in the world, whether it's search, which obviously is the largest search platform in the world, but also in other places such as Google Maps and across the ecosystem. And then using DBM to extend the reach of that ecosystem across the whole of the internet so you can operate at internet scale. The second challenge which we apply technology and signals to solve is really creating impact. And the way of thinking about greater impact is creating a better quality of experience with every impression. And we talked about a couple of basics in there. So for example, being able to ensure your ad is seen, and then also making sure that your ad is in the content that people love, and how we have shown that recall improves as enjoyment of the content improves. So our P score that we use for Google Preferred in UK and the US, we're able to show the higher the enjoyment score, the P score, the greater the brand recall of ads running in that content is. And then ultimately we talked about the importance of being able to have a format which really allows you to express what you want. So by that we were referring to TrueView. The final part of that presentation was talking about measurement, driving real results. And that's quite an interesting section, particularly when we go back to the questions we've just had, because the tools which we're developing to allow you to measure the results of your campaigns online, if you bear in mind that YouTube has been is 10 years old and has been owned by Google, I think now for 7 years, are absolutely groundbreaking, not just for online but even offline, in terms of what they're able to do and provide you with really strong controls versus exposed experiments to really see how your ads are working. So it's really still very, very early days, but what we can do is we can show you already that we can produce best-in-class tools, and those tools are only going to get stronger. When moving to Johan's presentations, where he's talked about keeping pace with the consumer, Johan talked very eloquently about a framework for thinking about how you match what you say with what the consumer is trying to do, and the See, Think, Do, Care framework. And what was really important about this, I think, is that you are trying to measure, you're matching what the consumer is trying to do with what you say to them with what you measure. So creating clear alignment across the board between the consumer's objective, your objective as a brand, and how you measure it. Right? And that's really important. The number of times we see people who come through and they say, oh, well, actually, I'm measuring my video campaign on click-through rates. You go, that's really interesting. Is your ad designed to drive click-through rates? Well, no, but, well, obviously it's not going to perform very well. And a great quote I heard was, measuring a video on click-through rates is like measuring a fish on its ability to ride a bicycle or climb a tree. Well, maybe not that far apart. You can design an ad to drive click-through rates, but measure what you're designing to achieve. So the See, Think, Do, Care framework was really useful. And just to remind you all, in C, it's about the objective is speaking to anyone who is in the category. Think is people who've signaled an interest. Do are people who are ready to buy. And Care, you would be talking to people who bought the product at least twice. So matching the KPIs to that, Johan went on to talk about how it was important to have both a content and a distribution strategy that matched. So, for example, in C content, you're talking to really drive overall awareness because you're very high up in the funnel. So you need to have broadly appealing content, but you would also have a similar matching distribution strategy. So you'd be looking for a reach distribution strategy, but introducing as much intelligence as you can to single out the wastage, i.e. people who will never buy in your category who you shouldn't speak to. Whereas when you're further down, so right down at the care end, you might be talking specifically to your customers, in which case the message should not just be some broad awareness campaign. It should actually really build gratitude. It should demonstrate gratitude to the customer and really build that sense of being valued. And again, the targeting methodologies can be far, far narrower and therefore far, far cheaper in terms of the overall media costs. You'd be looking at your CRM databases and how to work through those, but equally looking at tools like Customer Match, which allows you to match your CRM database to individuals across the internet. Johan had some great tips on content. The three key things being making sure that in all of your content the brand is recognizable, that it does provide that entertainment that makes people want to watch, but also importantly that it stands out. And quite a lot's been written on that, where people sort of say, well, what's unique about my brand? But actually it's more important to be distinctive, to actually be noticed, than it is to be unique. So making sure that you do stand out. It's a cluttered environment, lots of people talking a lot of the time, so make sure your ads can really cut through. And the final part, which I think Johan is passionate about, and I believe too, is really building a competitive advantage. And understanding, both as media people, but I would also say helping clients understand. You've spent, as brands, some brands, nearly 100 years perfecting TV, so they've got it down to fine art. Equally now, they're moving online, they're not going to achieve the same level as expertise overnight. It's something that has to be learnt. I'm not saying you have to spend 50,000 hours doing it, but there has to be learning, there has to be testing, and equally there has to be development. And so thinking of this as a progressive thing, building that advantage yourself over time is what's important, rather than the success of any individual one-off campaign. And learning to acknowledge failures is really, really important as well. The reason I say that is in my time in an ad agency, I worked out I'd actually ran a total or managed a total of $5 billion on behalf of various clients, and oddly enough, no campaign had ever failed. I would actually say that's not true. Some of the campaigns definitely must have failed by sheer statistics. However, no one wants to admit it was their campaign that failed, and that prevents learning. So understanding when to acknowledge shortcomings is a key part of that. So Johan talked about learning how to build awareness and distinctiveness in C, really building that relevant evergreen content, so making sure that you're constantly staying relevant in the think part. What is it? How do you want to drive the discussion for your brands? Making it super easy to buy. The number of brands which really fail on this level is just quite phenomenal. Even today, you would imagine that you should be able to buy with a maximum of 2 clicks, but preferably 1. The number of times I have timed out or I've abandoned a basket is just too shocking to mention. It just means we give our money to Amazon. So if your client's selling online, make sure they get that right. And the final part is really growing the reach of the CRM. Really think about CRM as an opportunity to contact all of your potential customers as often as possible, and probably the most cost-effective way of doing it. So growing the reach of CRM is really important. I'm not going to go through a summary of his third presentation because that was really a walkthrough of all the different tools. I would stress that, please go back, watch that again, make sure that you have isolated what are the hypotheses and challenges you're trying to deal with, and then work out which tools work for you. The beauty of that is if you can come up with a really smart way to use a tool which really answers your problem, the chances are your competitor hasn't, and therefore you have an advantage. Brilliant. So that was a summary of the videos. Please go back and watch them. Let's return to the questions. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return to the Hangout and refresh that to see if anyone has also posted any more questions. I do have some new changes to the document as well. So, here's a good question. So in Module 2, there was a lot of talk referring to how brands grow, where you state that advertising to people who already are advertisers doesn't yield results. What about word of mouth? Would it not make sense to heavily advertise to your loyal customers and have them do the advertising for you? The short answer on that is no. It's a very seductive argument, and in fact, that really was the heart of the whole paid, owned, and earned theory, which I believe is increasingly being evolved. And the important thing here is that, look, one, customers are generally not loyal. That's been proven time and time again. A good example for that would be cars. I'm a BMW fanatic, and I believe BMW genuinely are the best cars in the world. However, of the 3 cars that sit on my drive, I have 2 Range Rovers and only 1 BMW. And of all the cars I've ever bought, I've probably bought 15 cars in my life, only 2 were BMWs. So that's quite an extreme example, because that's in an area of high preference and often very equal parity in terms of performance. I mean, there's pretty much all luxury cars are pretty reliable. They all drive nicely. They're just different tweaks on them. When you look at something like bread or shampoo, you find that people switch brands massively all the time. And a lot of it has got to do with availability or price promotions. So loyal customers themselves are pretty much an artifact. I would even go so far as to say loyalty does not exist. People talk about, for example, loyalty in mobile phone contracts. That's not loyalty. That's because I'm tied to my mobile phone with a contract for a period of time, and then the question is, do I renew or not? So rather than loyalty, they're looking at reselling or churn, which I think is important. So first off, loyal customers don't exist. You may have preferred customers, but they certainly aren't loyal. The second thing is that pool of customers is too small, and they do not make recommendations very often. So if you think about your own experience, how often do you go out and recommend brands to other people? And the chances of you meeting someone just as they're about to buy a television or go out and buy tomato ketchup and say, oh, well, this is amazing. It happens, and when it happens, it's incredibly influential, but it doesn't happen often enough to make a difference at scale. So, advertising to loyal customers. If you're a competitive brand to my own, please do that. But if you worked for my brand, I would strongly recommend you don't. We say we need to, so moving on. You say we should expose the message to a large number of people. However, as I know through data, not just by assuming, who my customers normally are, isn't that budget going to waste? That's a really smart question. We say that you should expose your advertising to a large number of people who are known to be potential customers. So you want to speak to every potential buyer in your category. Right? So that's what's really important. Absolutely, if you just shoot blind and go to the largest possible number of people, then yes, budget will go to waste, because I'm not going to buy L'Oreal shampoo no matter how often they talk to me. Christian, I've seen a ping from you saying that you're trying to access the G-Phone app with an iPlus S6, but the event is not available. Jonna, if you're able to, if you could have a crack at that to see why it's not. I apologize, Christian, and we will try and get you back online. Apparently that's been solved. Fantastic, well done. Moving on. With regards to testing, now this is an interesting one. With regards to testing, especially with multiple YouTube ads, how would you go about this with limited budgets when the client can't produce more than 1 or 2 videos? And how can we make the client see the value investing in more than 1 ad copy? That's really true. And testing is something which advertisers struggle with in sort of the modern framework, because what they're really used to is a process where you would write a script, you would then maybe test elements of that script, you would refine the script, you would then make some storyboards, you might show them to a few people, you'd then make a an animation, and you might test that, and then you finally get around to making the ad. It can take up to 36 weeks. A famous quote from Jim Carroll, who was the head of planning at BBH a while back. He said, there are 36 people who can say no, but no one can say yes in the entire process, which means that the ad production process is not nimble. It's a very heavily researched process. So I think the first thing to do is to limit the number of variables when testing. We have seen massive differences in just testing edits of the same ad, right? And I think that's really the place to start. Start off with your TV ad and say, what are the minor edits and tweaks we can make in order to test that, right? And get clients used to the concept of making small and incremental tests on video they're already making. As they get comfortable with that, they will say, okay, well, we can use this process in more and better ways, and then they will start to move away from sort of the old focus group way of testing, where you're focusing on responses from 8 people, in which case why bother using focus groups at all, to a much more open and web-based version of testing. What I've seen with certain clients where they've done this is they start to really get quite into it. We've had one client trying to test storyboards and animations rather than shot video. I wouldn't recommend that. That's really a step too far. Please only start off with testing finished ads and small edits and variations on those. But equally, we are having discussions with some advertisers about using dynamic display ads to test storyboards, which might be quite interesting. So there are definitely solutions to all of these challenges, and they can be developed. There may be some business models where you or your agencies could make money within those. But always start off with clear hypotheses, test small things, generate results, move on from there. And in any test, be open with the client to say, you know what, this test may actually produce a null result. So learning that there is no difference is still a learning. Moving on. Besides brand lift, what are the key metrics I think you should look at when measuring YouTube? At the end of the day, it really comes down to your business and what it is you're trying to do. The important thing here is that the majority of branding campaigns, so my background is branding, we are trying to look at some kind of awareness lift or ad recall as the primary metric. I do think that the intent signal is also really useful. So looking at the share of search that exposed versus control people is really useful. Although many marketers are still not so au fait with that. I think there are a number of other metrics which you can look at, whether it's sales or engagements, etc. All of those things are really important, or could be really important depending on your strategy. But the most important thing is that people have seen your ad, and that ad has been encoded into their brain. So to me, awareness and ad recall are still what I would call the king of metrics, or certainly the queen, or maybe a knight, but I would certainly keep them really important. And figuring out how to drive those efficiently rather than noodling around in every metric possible is well worth doing. If you have a different business model, by all means, go and start looking at those other metrics. If you're looking at what I would call a building a brand in the classical sense, then rather than constantly twiddling with the metrics, work out how to drive those first and then take it further. Whew. So, another question. This is from Tommy. So I noticed that conversations aren't given much in these presentations. Aren't given much attention in these presentations. Having seen your ad extensively in the chosen market segment isn't really helping much if your client has a limited marketing budget and those ad views don't produce conversions. Sorry, I misread it. Conversions. I feel the cost per conversion and the return on ad spend should receive much more attention in these presentations. I think that's a really interesting point. We tend to work with clients with larger budgets. We tend to work with clients who are communicating in multiple places and also selling through multiple, both on and offline. And so specific conversions on ads is much more of a performance-driven approach. Interestingly enough, we are seeing increasingly brands or businesses driving sales directly and converting directly through YouTube. For me, the reason why we don't talk about that is we would put that much more in a performance or a DR focus, and there are other teams that deal with that very heavily, and equally the skill that exists within the agency world to do that is, I would say, on a par with much of the skill internally at Google when it comes to performance. So in that sense, we're trying to focus our efforts on accelerating the people who have come in from a much more classical branding route than a performance route. But you make a good point there. Well done, thank you. So we're coming towards the end of the questions, and we tend to there's one more which is really about measuring ROI of online video and across all screens, and which I will answer last, and then this one. So how do you get traditional advertisers to believe in new ways of targeting and things like a voluntary view? It's very difficult, and we accept that. I think what's really interesting is everybody has grown up with age and sex, so demographics, as a standard way of targeting and a way of defining, who I'm going to speak to as my customers. And I think that does a couple of things. Actually, before we go into that, I think let's also understand where it came from. If you are working in a system where there's a limited amount of information, there is absolutely no there are no logged in users, i.e. traditional television, and the processing cycles of the system are quite slow, i.e. they take weeks and months. So once a program's been seen, or an ad's been seen, or you've done a piece of research, it may take weeks or even months to get the consolidated data back. That constrains you to descriptions of people which move slowly and are relatively static. So obviously very few people will change sex. It happens, but not significant enough to matter to marketing. It's very important for the individuals, but from a marketer's point of view, that's fine. Equally, people age at precisely the rate of 1 year every year, and so when we look at that data, we can it's nice and stable. So in terms of creating segmentations using demographics, that works particularly well. So that's what people have grown up with, right? But if you really think about it, I think that way of describing a target or a target market or a potential customer is really rooted in a system which is not agile. When you move to a system which is completely agile, and you have much more information, and that information can be updated very, very quickly, in a matter of seconds, then actually having descriptions, and you can be much more accurate and be much more granular. I think we should be starting to think of, okay, well, what makes sense, or new ways of looking at our customers. And I love the See, Think, Do, Care framework, because if you're saying to me, what's more important? If I'm a bank, is the fact that you're male or female more important than the fact you're a customer or not a customer? I would go with the latter every time. I would have one message for my customers, and one message for people who are not my customers. Simple as that. The same would apply for pretty much any category I can think of. Equally, are you in market, or are you have you just bought? Okay. These are all things which I think are really, really important. And so traditional advertisers have been brought up with what was available at the time, but starting off with really simple ways of saying, you know what, customer versus not customer is much more important than male or female. Let's talk about it, right? Equally, if male or female is important, do we actually want to make a distinction? Because you know what, for the majority of our audiences online, we don't have a problem to say what's the ad you'd serve to a man versus what's the ad you'd serve to a woman, if you want to make that distinction. What's the ad you'd want to serve to an older person or a younger person? Again, so I think helping the client understand the relevant axes upon which their targeting can be cut, while still keeping the groups really broad, is important. And moving away from this idea of laser targeting 16-year-old girls who live in the north of the country. Voluntary views are also quite interesting. So True Views are fairly unique, and as I say in all my presentations, the way Google marketed TrueView when it was launched by saying it's an ad you can skip was a momentary bout of madness. To this day, I still remember when someone presented it to me, and so they said, we've got this great thing, it's going to change advertising, it's an ad you can skip. And my response was, I don't want an ad. I don't want my ads to be skipped. Thank you very much, goodbye. I think what's important here is getting people to test it, getting to people to see what it does for them. And what we see universally is once people start advertising online, they start using TrueView, actually they very rapidly graduate to having large amounts of TrueView as a share of their budgets, and much more than 50%. It's very rare that advertisers decide not to use TrueView. But equally, if it doesn't work for them, and they decide not to do it, then there are other ways of exposing ads which don't have to use TrueView. The important thing, though, is if you're going to work with voluntary views, do spend some time understanding the full value of them. So you have the exposed view, the partial views. Many of those partial views will view at least 50% of the ad. It's not that everybody skips on 5 seconds. So really learning and becoming conversant in that, or getting your Google team to come to you and help to talk through it is really, really important. Importantly, I always stress though, you can use the traditional TV ads in those spots and they will work. And what I would really push people against is saying, in order for this to be effective, you have to cut new creative. You can cut new creative and you can add incremental efficiency or significant efficiency, but your TV ad will work just as well, if not better, on YouTube and on a mobile phone than it will on TV. It's very, very rare that you get an ad which actually works worse. So the last part, and really is this question of ROI. So, in fact, we've got a couple of comments. I'm just reading those. Can you make a comment about buying impressions directly from YouTube in comparison with using AdWords and TrueView and the advantages and disadvantages of each? So, I think what you are referring to is buying impressions directly via either AdX or DBM. That's actually going to be covered in the final section. So I'm not a DBM specialist, but you will have people covering that. And then there's a comment from Christian saying, you are totally disconnected from me every time you talk about branding. In my world, branding is a waste of our customers' money. you are connected with me when you're talking about conversions. So Christian, yeah, I apologize then if you feel that way. I would challenge your statement. If you look at the S&P 500, the 33% of the value of the average S&P 500 company is bound up in its brand. 42% of Louis Vuitton, 49% of McDonald's is bound up in the value of its brand. And therefore, building the brand is incredibly important. Google alone, I mean, we make amazing products. We have a huge customer base. People use our products all the time, but still 15% of Google's value is tied up in the brand value of Google, which if you then amortize that out across the market cap of Google, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. So, I would certainly say that branding is hugely important. Conversions, of course, are hugely important, and actually, as experts, we need to be able to bring the two together. But I would challenge anyone who says that they don't buy brands. If you look at the cars you drive, the products that are on your shelves at home, I am sure that you will see at least one occasion where you've bought a branded product where you could have bought a parity non-branded product for less. So branding does improve both the ability to win new customers, but also charge more for the same product, so improve your margin. So I apologize that you feel that branding is not relevant. If you'd like to post another comment, I'll refresh and we can take a look at that. So I think the last more comments coming in. Apart from brand value, brand recognition is an important factor to consider in the sales decision process. Absolutely, Frederick. So importantly, brand recognition is a shorthand. If you think of us as consumers, when I go down to the supermarket to buy something, it might be just toothpaste, right? But if my usual brand is not available, I'll go, well, what do I think is good enough? And the brand acts as a shorthand for me making that choice. And if you were to make a deeply considered, data-driven, evaluative choice on everything you did, you would probably never leave home. Equally, if you think about booking an airline ticket, I think Turkish Airlines is a great example of a brand who many years ago no one would have dreamt of flying with, and now people fly with all the time. Another one which I would think is quite interesting is Norwegian. So Norwegian benefits greatly from the fact that Norway has just a good reputation in the world. When you say to people, what's Norway like? They say it's a lovely country, it's very clean, full of really smart people. Would you like to get on one of their airplanes? Absolutely, right? So you benefit just from the halo of the brand of Norway. So I think there's lots of ways where this happens, and recognition of the brand within that is absolutely key, which is why recognition and recall of the brand within an ad is absolutely essential. So often you see brands where people remember the ad, but they can't, ads where people remember the ad, but they don't remember the brand, in which case, going back to Christian's points, you are definitely wasting your money. If people can remember the ad but not your brand, change the ad. The final part question, more questions coming through. What's my experience on combining display and search formats? Do you see higher effects on search when the message in display is thought of and covered in both campaigns? Wow, so the short answer to that is yes. You definitely see, and we are, interestingly enough, seeing a swathe of advertisers, so you're very much on the front of a wave here, where we see advertisers who are traditionally performance driven, who are now moving towards what I would call it a sort of a branding approach, or a brand aware approach. So what's happened is these some of them very, very large businesses, have built their businesses out of a purely a conversion basis or a attribution basis, often last click, which as we all know is now wrong because of the impact of mobile. But they've rapidly pushed to the limit of the effectiveness of that. And what's happening is they're either losing out to competition or their acquisition costs are getting incredibly high because people are less likely to click on brand they do not recognize. And so what they've found is that by improving the standing of their brand, they can both bring new people into their category, but also reduce the cost of acquisition or the cost of conversion through having a stronger brand. I'm sure you've all seen the massive TV campaigns that Booking has been running. That's a classic example, I think, in the travel vertical, where you have a number of very, very performance-orientated advertisers. They're finding that actually not having a brand or having a strong brand makes a huge difference. In the UK alone, the money aggregators spend over $100 million between them. So compare the market, Money Supermarket, and I can't remember the other two, so you can see who's doing really well. Go compare. Those brands are spending fortunes making sure that they have very strong brands as well as perform very well in search. So yes, strong brands do improve metrics at the back end. Equally, remarketing from your remarketing list to search and back again can also improve efficiencies quite significantly. Right. So the final comment is really about ROI, which is what we were talking about. And this is a really tough one because people are used to having a really short link between the ROI of a digital campaign and literally the money in the bank, the sale. When people are working in an upper funnel environment, it gets even harder to actually measure and directly correlate attribution. People will see the ad online and buy offline and vice versa. We've seen all of those effects. So the ability to really measure accurate ROI of online video is not where a performance brand or people with a classical performance background would like it to be or are either used to. Equally, as we discussed right at the beginning of this session, for many advertisers who are coming from a traditional background, the methodologies they use are probably either not sensitive enough or well matched enough to really pick up on the opportunities that are generated by using, for example, smart targeted online advertising. So, for example, splitting customers versus non-customers, exposed versus non-exposed. That's just traditionally not what people did. They would just look at age demographics very broadly. So if you're a brand which is not one of the biggest brands in the country, by the biggest I'm talking about maybe the top 20, or the Unilevers and the Procter and Gambles of the world, but equally you are trying to understand a deeper view than just the in-market conversion, then getting to grips with understanding the impact of awareness, brand recall, and preference, and how that then impacts subsequent conversion, I think is really important. My point of view on that is I would certainly recommend the See, Think, Do, Care framework for KPIs, which Johan talks about in his speech, in his section. And I would see it as an area of opportunity for agencies to add value to clients. One of the things which I think is really important is clients only have one brand or maybe a couple, but they only have one business, and if that goes, then that's their livelihood. The beauty of agencies is you work with a number of clients, so you're actually able to gain experience and look across a broad range of clients who are naturally doing different things anyway. So you're able to say, actually, clients who work in this way do X, clients who work in this way do Y. So by putting a lot of focus and attention on really defining metrics and then following them up and then doing meta-analysis within an agency, you're really able to add value to clients' businesses, add value to your services, and importantly, that point of view will make it much, much harder for a client to decide, you know what, maybe I can get a better service from another agency. I think that kind of service about really being able to show clients how to manage those KPIs and understand return on investment will make you one of the highest ranking partners on their roster. So I've now spoken for nearly an hour. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much for taking part in the Partner Academy C-Suite program. Please, please, please feedback both on this Hangout. If you found it useful, we can do more of them. But also, please submit questions which we can arrange for Jonna to respond back to you on, and make sure that you attend the upcoming sessions. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this, and thank you so much for taking part yourself. I know time is precious, and your attendance is very much welcome from us. Thank you very much, and goodbye.